All right, so one of the times that I failed at a task and how I recovered was I had a requirement to process retirement orders. That was part of my duties. And I had gotten a request from a colonel, and I was processing that, and I had another request come in, and it caused me to stop processing the first request because I thought I had time to pick it up and do it later, and ended up coming up by the time I was done with the second task, and I got back to processing the colonel's orders. Things were too late, and he didn't receive them in time, and that caused some problems. He was angry, and we obviously didn't provide him the customer service we intended to. So the way I recovered from that was I sat down with my supervisor, and we looked at we made a flow chart, a process chart, and we identified all the tasks that are required to process those orders and how long it takes, a minimum and a maximum time period, and we actually even did this little Gantt chart where we kind of put it all on the schedule to show how much time it could take and where there was points in this process where things could lag maybe a day or two, and then it also identified points in the process where things you couldn't lag because there was just no flex time because it had to go to another organization or somewhere else, and those were critical steps. So we identified the time period, we identified the critical steps that were critical to meeting the time, and we actually took that and we provided it to all the other people that processed orders so that they could benefit from the, me learning from my mistake. They could benefit from that too. And the other thing I did was, we called the colonel, explained to him, apologized, did the best we could to try to mend that fence. But the bottom line is we identified what went wrong, identified how to keep it from going wrong again, and created some tools to help us make sure that we were able to not repeat that mistake. That concludes my answer. All right, so I'm right at 2.5 minutes. Not the longest, but I was also using an example, and I may have got some facts wrong, but I was using an example that wasn't my own. Now I will tell you, when you use an example, if you could paint a picture, and I say this all the time. Danny's heard me say this, and I'll keep saying it. You'll hear it until it's like I can repeat that for you, which is okay. But basically, what you want to do is if you can paint a picture while you're answering the question, that's good. So from your story, I would remember, oh, that was the girl that messed up the colonel's orders, right? I would remember that before I remember your name, okay? And so, especially if you're interviewing with people that don't know you, right? They're gonna, if you paint a picture when you're telling your answer, they'll remember that story that you tell probably before they'll remember your name, okay? Because if they got a stack of, half a dozen or a dozen people that are interviewing, it's hard to keep track of names, but they'll remember the story. So if you can tell a story like you did, actual, and this is what they call a CCAR process, and I'll talk about that here in a second, then that's a good thing, okay? So let's kind of go over some of the things that I identified as being critical to this answer. And you also have to remember that whenever they ask you a question, it's usually not, the answer to the question is usually not what they're looking for. They're looking for something else, right? And so in this question, what they're looking for is they're trying to figure out if you're the type of employee that can learn from their mistakes, okay? They really don't want to know about the time you failed. They want to know, how do you learn and how do you get better at your job? That's the real question, okay? So, so you want to talk about how you analyzed your process and you identified how a critical step got missed, okay? And that's why you failed, right? So that's the first thing you want to do is say, I failed. The first thing I did was I looked at my process and identified where it failed at, okay? Then you want to talk about how you went about making changes to that process to make sure you don't fail again. Because again, you're trying to show, I learn from my mistakes and I don't repeat them. Okay. You also want to indicate you communicated that issue to your supervisor, which again you did. You said, hey, I sat down with my boss and we figured out how to fix it, right? So that was good. You also want to offer or implement changes to the process. So you don't want to just say, hey, I looked at it, I figured out where I messed up, what do I do, right? Because then you're telling that panel, that hiring official, like, oh, I'm going to have to help this person figure things out all the time, right? You want to say, hey, I don't know what the other people told you, but not only do I identify mistakes, but I also offer solutions, okay? Which is better, right? You're always trying to demonstrate how you're going to be a really good employee or a great employee, right? Not just an average employee, right? So that's why you want to say, hey, identify the process, and I went to my boss and I told them, and I had made up this flow chart, and we, sat down and figured out how to make it better, okay? But I had offered something to my supervisor to help fix it, okay? And then the last thing is you want to indicate that you shared that lesson with your peers, okay? So we took that flow chart and we gave it to the rest of the retirement people so that they could learn from my mistake, okay? And that's a part of what's called high velocity learning. And I printed out this here's just a little 2-page thing. There are books on high velocity learning, okay? And they reference the main book in this 2-page paper by Spear. I think his name is Michael Steve Spear. If you're interested in getting those books, I would recommend go to Amazon.com, buy the used version from the. There are lots of places like Salvation Army and stuff that will sell their used versions. It costs you like $2 and another $1 or $2 in shipping. So for $3 or $4, you can get most of these type books. But at any rate, if you're not familiar with the term high velocity learning, most of your leadership that are going to be on hiring panels have heard that term. If all you do is read this sheet, you're going to know a lot more about it than most people. Okay? So if you mention the word high velocity learning or mention that fact, that might get you some points. That might make the difference for you. So, but basically the basic tenet of high velocity learning is when you make a mistake, you examine your process, you fix it, and then you share that with everybody else. And that's the way the organization gets better, and not just one group is good, the other group is not so good. High velocity learning is all about sharing your lessons learned, okay? Which is basically what I had outlined here as far as what makes a good answer, okay? I messed up, I evaluated my process, I identified where the mess up was, and I implemented changes to that process to make sure that we don't do it again. For most people, they'll stop there. That's a pretty good answer. You can make your answer even better by saying, and then I shared my answer with everybody else in my work group so we could all benefit. Because now you're showing that not only are you an okay employee, you're a great employee because you're making all the other employees even better. Okay? And that's what the hiring official is going to get excited about. He's going to go, oh, I need somebody like this that can help make the organization better. Okay. So I talk about using the CCAR example. If you're not familiar with that, it's challenge, context, action, results. So, and that's a complicated way of saying paint a picture, right? So again, you say, hey, I had to process this order, right? That's the context. The orders were for a colonel that was mad. That's my challenge, right? My action was I evaluated the process and I made it better, and the result is we never messed up another colonel's orders again, right? So again, it's just it's kind of a fancy way of saying paint the picture. Tell them what you were doing, what the challenges were, what you did, and then what the result was. Okay? Which again isn't necessarily part of that question. Tell us about a time you failed at a task and how did you recover. It doesn't say what was the impact of that recovery, but you always want to make sure you say, hey, and here was the final result, right? And that result was positive. I talk about the high velocity edge there by Steven Spear. Again, this is a big buzzword right now in the Navy and the DoD in general. Okay, so if you can use that buzzword, again, it might get you that extra point over somebody else that didn't. So I've got some do's and don'ts here. Don't say I failed a lot. I swear to God, I was sitting in an interview and they asked that question, and the first thing that the applicant said was, "Oh, I failed a lot." And then they went on and told it. It's like, no. Don't say things that are a reason for them not to hire you, right? And we do a thing with what's your biggest weakness, right? It's the same thing. It's like, why are they asking me to tell them why they shouldn't hire me, right? But you don't want to give them reasons by saying, "Oh, I fail a lot." Don't say that. And don't say, "Well, I never fail." Okay? Because that's just going to tell the panel that they don't really understand the question, right? The question, remember, the real question is, how do you learn from your mistakes and get better? That's the real question. Okay? Own a failure, even if it's just an intermediate step. And what I mean by that is, even if you don't make big failures, odds are you make a little failure here and there that you can use as an example. Okay? I got asked this question, a form of this question in an interview, and I was like, you know what? I really don't fail a lot because I always do my homework and I know that I'm going to succeed before I do something. So it's really hard for me to think about anything I failed at, right? Again, at that point, I didn't understand what the question was. The real question was about the process. So even if it's just an intermediate step of like, the orders didn't get processed in time because I forgot to put it on the right form and it delayed it for a couple of days before I could get it fixed. And even though we got it processed, it wasn't a real failure, right? We got it done. You can take a little part of that and say, I failed to do this and it cost us a day or two, and then talk about that. So if you're the type that's like, I can't think of a lot of failures, then you can say that. Say, I'm pretty meticulous about following the process and doing stuff, so I don't have a lot of failures. But I can tell you about some things where we had hiccups. Because the hiccups, again, you're just wanting to get to the point where you can start talking about, you can evaluate your steps, okay, and you know that, okay, if there's a hiccup, I evaluate the process, I fix the process, and I share that with everybody else. That's what you really want to get to. So you don't have to say, you don't have to think of some huge failure. Just anything that's a hiccup or anything will work in this context. Don't blame somebody else, even if there's their fault. So when you're telling your story, don't say, "Oh, so and so messed up and I had to fix it for him." Okay, even though that's maybe true, you want to avoid that, because then people will be like, "Oh man, we got somebody who's going to be all about drama, pointing fingers," and that's, again, if you're looking to hire somebody, that's not necessarily what you want. You want somebody that's always positive and is saying, okay, here was a mistake, but I don't want to find out whose fault it was. I want to find out what step in the process allowed them to make a mistake. Okay? And I have this issue. I have a retail store in San Antonio, and sometimes we have a customer that gets mad, and I'll have to call them and say, "Hey, this customer just complained, who was working on Saturday at this location or whatever," and people are like, "Oh well," and they think I'm trying to find out who to blame. I'm like, no, we're not trying to blame anybody. We want to find out who it was, what they did. We want to look at the process and figure out where our process allowed them to not do something which caused the problem. I don't want to find out who, I don't want to blame anybody. I want to blame the process. Okay? So that's why I say don't blame somebody, because as soon as you do that, then again you're telling that hiring official that, you know, I'm going to point fingers or I'm going to try to blame somebody, when in fact you want to concentrate on your process and how to fix it and then share that, right? Because that makes you a much more agreeable, pleasant employee. Which again, that's who I want to hire. And if I've got two people that told the same story and one of them said, oh yeah, well so-and-so kept messing things up and I always had to fix it, versus somebody saying, we kept having a problem with this and so we looked at our process and figured out a way to make sure that we overcame it. That sounds a lot more like the person I want to hire, right? So just kind of think of those things when you're doing your answer. Which goes to the next line there. Do concentrate on the process. So in the first sentence, you know, John at XYZ office didn't send me his info, versus I didn't have a reminder to follow up with XYZ office. Okay. See, one, you're blaming them. One, you're identifying an error in your process. Can you guys see the difference between those two examples? So what I would tell you, like I always do, is take this question and find a spouse, significant other, the dog, your goldfish, whatever, and tell them this story. And when you do, or answer this question, when you do, set your timer on your iPhone and get to where you can fill up that 2 to 3.5 minute time period hitting all these points. Okay? If you've got a camcorder or even your iPhone, record yourself answering that question, and then once you're done, do something for about 30 minutes, come back, okay, or even the next day, come back, play that with this sheet and go, okay, did I do that? Did I do that? Did I do that? Did I do that? And get to where, and practice it enough to where you can sit down and you can give that answer with hitting all those points without thinking about it. Because when you do an interview, you know, there's always a little bit of nervousness or tension involved, and you know, you may, again, it goes back to the hitting the baseball. You may have gotten to where you can hit the baseball, okay, but now all of a sudden there's 50,000 people in the stands cheering, and the game's on the line, and you're the one up there that has to hit the home run, right? So you want to make sure that you've practiced it enough to where you really don't have to think about it a whole lot. You go, okay, here's the things I'm going to say. And you notice I'm not looking at my notes when I say that when you answer that question, give your context, okay? Give the challenge, talk about your action, talk about your results. Make sure you say you evaluated the process, you identified the error in the process, and you identified a way to fix the process, and then you shared those results with everybody else, okay? I didn't have to look to go through that list. You want to make sure you practice it enough to where you can say all those things that I just said without looking at that list. And that's when you know you're ready to answer that question on the interview. Any questions, discussion? I'm usually pretty close. I'm 1 minute over.
Yeah.
Oh.